How did Alexander the Great get to be great? Like with most successful people, it had little to do with skill and a lot to do with nepotism. From his mother, he inherited a grudge and the craziness to act upon it, unlike the rest of us who would rather live out our revenge fantasies in our heads. From his father, he inherited a kingdom and the means to expand. It was the perfect storm of genes and inheritance. As I explained previously, 300 Spartans stalled the Persian Empire with the help of a comb salesman. Alexander's mother, Olympias, was a descendant of that salesman and was looking to grow her comb business. Alexander's father, Philip, was king of Macedon, however you say it, and looking to expand his kingdom. Their marriage allowed both to succeed and resulted in the consolidation of classical Greece under Philip's leadership. They dreamed of extending their sales empire into Persia, but were cut short when Philip was assassinated, probably due to his controversial stance on iPhone versus Android. He chose Windows Phone. Alexander, the not yet great, picked up where his father left off. After a brief period of reminding the Greeks who his parents were, he set his sights on Persia for their crimes against his ancestors, but mostly to make a lot of money. The Persians had grown cocky in the 100 years since the Greco-Persian Wars. They had learned to speak in third person, and therefore did not consider the unsolicited Greek salespeople a threat. Alexander and his sales army approached the first Persian garrison and knocked on the door. The Persians answered. Alexander asked if they would like to buy his combs, guaranteed to improve confidence, reverse balding, and harmonize spiritual balance. The Persians predictably laughed in the third person. Unsolicited sales tactics in this century? But Alexander's sales pitch wasn't done. He reached up and lowered his sunglasses. It was like staring into the heavens, and God smiling back. Alexander had the most beautiful, soul-piercing eyes the world had ever seen. Greece, Persia, unsolicited salespeople. These words meant nothing. The Persian defenders agreed to buy anything and everything. They offered their kidneys too, but Alexander didn't currently have need for them, so they promised to keep them warm. With the sales successfully secured, Alexander recruited a valued friend to be their own boss and act as sales governor for the region. Alexander kept all the profits, but the pride and accomplishment of working for him was its own reward. Here's a trivia fun fact. Cyclops in X-Men was inspired by Alexander the Great, as both wear glasses to contain their powers. They had to reduce Cyclops' power to merely energy beams with the strength to melt mountains, because having the power of Alexander would make all the other characters irrelevant. After winning his first battle, Alexander moved deeper into enemy territory and secured more sales contracts. When news reached the Persian king, Darius, that someone was selling on his turf, he was outraged. Darius did not inherit his kingdom, but was crowned after the previous two kings were poisoned. He was a self-made man, natural enemy of the cocky nepo baby, Alexander. Darius had heard reports of Alexander's hypnotic eyes, but dismissed the danger. Eyes caused weak knees, not capitulation. It was likely some embellished story to hide the cowardice of his garrisons. Darius gathered his special forces, trained in anti-sales techniques, and marched to meet Alexander in the field. Unfortunately for Darius, Alexander's eyes were the real deal. The Persian army crumbled to sales pressure. Alexander made a daring attempt to make eye contact with Darius, but the Persian king covered his eyes and ran real fast. So fast, he was regrettably forced to leave behind his wife and kids. Or at least that's what he told them. After working so hard to defeat Darius, Alexander needed to let loose. Darius hadn't technically surrendered, but for someone born into a position of power, it was the hardest Alexander had ever worked in his life. Alexander headed to Egypt, party capital of the world, an unwilling subject of Persia. After seeing Alexander's eyes, Egypt welcomed him as liberator and declared him their new king. He founded the city of Alexandria to bolster his MLM's supply chain, named after himself, because of course. Alexander was tempted to stay in Egypt, but by now they were only calling him Alexander the Very Good, which is not great. Alexander chased after Darius on a world tour, determined to make eye contact, but the socially awkward Darius refused to do so, escaping again after battles in Assyria and Babylonia. Darius was furious. He had instructed his troops to close their eyes, and couldn't understand why his more outgoing soldiers failed to follow simple instructions. Time and space were running out for the Persian king, however, and Darius was eventually stabbed to death by a relative. Typical. Social awkwardness seemed to run in the family, as Darius's self-proclaimed successor also refused to make eye contact with Alexander, and the world tour continued. To make a long story short, this guy was also betrayed, and there was no one left to oppose Alexander's claim to the Achaemenid throne. Alexander's empire was the largest the world had ever seen. He had avenged his ancestors. His sales were higher than numbers could count. He founded more cities, all named after himself. There was nothing Alexander couldn't do. Of course, sales are only one part of a successful business, so Alexander headed to India to establish a call center for his MLM. The road to India was long, however, and Alexander quickly grew bored. His eyes caught sight of a goat and lingered. Not for the reason you're probably thinking. All this time, Alexander had focused only on selling to humans. Did animals not have fur and need of his combs, too? It was an entire new market. Alexander approached the goat, looked deep into its eyes, and gave an impassioned sales pitch. His followers wilted, and the sun seemed to shine a little brighter. The goat, however, ignored him completely. Alexander laughed uncomfortably. Perhaps the goat was nearsighted. He repeated his pitch, a little closer and louder. The goat farted and walked away. Alexander fainted. It was the first sale he had ever failed. How could it have all gone so wrong? For anyone paying attention, it's clear human eyes are not shaped like goat eyes. What is beautiful to us is unsightly and frankly quite nauseating to them. Alexander's eyes held no power over the horned ones. Alexander was devastated. He fled India and rushed back to Babylon. He bought crystals to protect him from negative energy and scented candles to lift his spirits. He bathed in essential oils and detoxified his body daily. He surrounded himself with motivational posters and read every self-help book at the library, but nothing could cure Alexander. At age 32, Alexander, the now great, died of a broken heart, or what the rest of us would call a little adversity. Alexander changed the world, but most importantly, he taught us anything is possible if you're born to the right parents. Are you cursed with too much money? Burdened with too much free time? Good news! I'm an author, and my satirical fantasy books are just what you need. Links are in the description.